right. So we're on.
We are on.
This is the first Scott Prop and Roll live stream.
I'm going to start with Scott Reeder, who I'm sure if you're watching this live stream, you're familiar with Scott from his Scott Prop and Roll. But here we go. Scott Reeder is a highly respected prop master with over 30 years of experience in the business. Good job.
Thanks.
He has worked on numerous high-profile projects, including Pitch Perfect, Machete, Grindhouse, Fast Food Nation, and Friday the 13th. He's worked on some of the most acclaimed TV shows of the past 20 years, such as Friday Night Lights, The Leftovers, and American Crime. Scott has become a prominent figure on social media. He has amassed over 3.5 million followers, subscribers across YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram with his prop videos and his prolific use of dad jokes. All right.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's true. We also have joining us today John Navarro. He is a professional armorer and prop master with over 20 years of experience in the business. His resume includes movies like Killers of the Flower Moon and Hell or High Water, and TV shows including Roswell, The Sun, and Dallas. John is known for his attention to historical accuracy, having been a very active Civil War reenactor before entering the industry. He is a stickler for proper protocols involving firearms and shares his expertise through workshops and seminars aimed at improving safety standards across the industry. John is as comfortable with a cannon as he is a six-shooter. Dean Goodine is one of Canada's top prop masters, having had an illustrious career spanning over 3 decades in the film and television business. Dean's impressive portfolio includes work on blockbuster films such as, and these are blockbusters, Inception, Unforgiven, Legends of the Fall, and Open Range, as well as the Stargate TV series and Apple's C. He recently finished the action film The Order with Jude Law, where he was the property master and an armorer. He has also published a book, They Don't Pay Me to Say No, My Life in Film and Television Props, which I have not read, but just flipping through it earlier, I'm definitely going to take a look at that one.
That's a good one.
And Dutch has done a lot of press lately on this subject, so he's very well versed. Dutch Merrick is a highly respected armorer and prop master with over 25 years experience in the business. Dutch has worked on a diverse range of high-profile films and television series, including SWAT, The Island, CSI New York, and SEAL Team. He is a past president of IATSE Local 44, Hollywood Property Craftspersons, and a passionate educator, frequently teaching his class prop gun set safety for film and TV to train the next generation of armorers and prop masters and to raise the bar for set safety standards industry-wide. Hi, Dutch. I am Mark Spacek. I've worked in and around this industry for 25 years. I've been with Scott for over 10 years as his assistant prop master. Some of my credits include The Leftovers, American Crime, The Sun, Alita Battle Angel, and The Dark Knight Rises. I'm one of the prop guys on Scott Prop and Roll, where we're working to grow the brand and continue to make compelling content. And behind the desk over there, not on camera, our producer and technical director is Alternate Form, Timmy Brennan. And he's a filmmaker in Austin. He's got a YouTube channel under Alternate Form, and he does fan edits and video essays on film analysis. I watched a video he put up last night about kind of a B sci-fi movie called The
Brain That Wouldn't Die.
The Brain That Wouldn't Die, and it's like a review essay on this thing, and it's a long video, but man, it is good. I recommend you watch it. It is good.
One thing to do is to get up to speed on the trial. During the pre-trial hearing, these things happened, and it was pretty important. One of the big headlines was Alec Baldwin's role as producer ruled not relevant to Rust trial.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
And when a lot of people would comment on my posts, I don't post about Rust a lot. I've kept those to a minimum, but when I do, one of the biggest things is they say, well, I don't think he's guilty as an actor, but as a producer. So this kind of took that whole thing out of the equation. So he's being looked at as an actor. His role as a producer was pretty much
In name only.
yeah, it was a title that, he put in his contract, and there were other people that did the hiring and the, handled
Yeah,
all
it's a
that.
classic thing in the business where an actor lends his name to a production as a producer. It helps them raise money.
So, John or Dean, do you guys have anything to weigh in on this? How did you react when you found out that was taken out of the equation?
I've never been called by an actor, producer to be the prop master on a film. It's always been the line producer or the production manager that's been really in charge of the hiring. And then I sit down with them and talk about crew. My dealings with Alec Baldwin, for instance, on a film was pretty professional, pretty straightforward, but he wasn't in charge of hiring me. And same with Brad Pitt or any of the actors that had their names.
Yeah, Dean
attached to the
worked
film.
on a movie with Alec Baldwin, I guess 1997, with Anthony Hopkins, The Edge, correct?
That is correct.
And were
And
there a lot of firearms involved?
there weren't, but there was a pivotal scene where they find an 1886 Winchester in a cabin, and we do a scene where they're drinking whiskey, and Alec is slowly loading bullets, dummy bullets, into the rifle with Anthony on the other side of the table, and then later points the rifle at Anthony in a scene where you don't know what's going to happen. And so, again, he was very professional, a very controlled set, very strong first AD. So you get on a set like that, you can control the adrenaline of the set, and the AD's responsible for controlling that adrenaline on a set. If they're screaming and yelling, then everybody else is working a little bit pensively. But if you have very strong, calm professionals around you, you can control the energy of the set quite easy, and that was a very calm, quiet set.
And one thing I do want to bring up is, because a lot of people will say the rules, the cardinal rule of weapons handling is you never point a gun at someone. But in the film business, there are many cases where we have to. I can fake it, and it looks like I'm pointing the gun at Mark, but I'm not. I'm pointing at a foot in front of him. So depending on the angle, but if the camera's going over your shoulder, you're going to see which way that gun's pointing. So a lot of times we will, but that's why we use dummy rounds, because once those dummies go into the weapon, it's basically a toy. It can't hurt you. And once it's proven 100% that those are dummies, then the actor's free to act.
Well, and we have a video we're going to show that really goes into a lot of the details about the protocols, set safety, how we do things. And it includes kind of like the 3 essential rules of firearm handling. And now we're going to show a video that shows you the proper protocols.
So before you run that, I just want to say, so we put this video together for this live stream. Timmy did a wonderful job. Mark, John, and Dutch contributed to some of the verbiage, and I hope you guys like it.
I think that video, the goal of it was to really show everyone the nuts and bolts way that things happen on a set, especially with a revolver, where you can see the rounds in the cylinder from the front and how dummy rounds have to be used. We're going to bounce around, talk about different things. We want to go over the case, but, dummy rounds that should have been in that gun when he did the rehearsal, when the gun was fired. This is like the beginning and end of everything. The protocols should have been followed. Had they been followed, if you can hear that, if you can't and you watch the video, there's a little BB inside. You shake it next to your ear, you can hear it. Had they done that, this wouldn't have happened.
I thought the video was perfect. I think it should be in all the locals around North America and the world. I thought the video was as perfect a video and as perfect an explanation of what we do on set to keep everybody safe. That's the ultimate goal, is to keep everybody safe. And that video nailed it. That was a great video.
That pretty much sums up everything that we're here to talk about. If those steps had been taken, nothing would have happened. It's unbelievable that it's something so simple that we've been doing for years, for decades and decades, and thousands upon thousands upon thousands of blanks have been fired. And, since 1993, nothing's happened until Rust. And it was strictly because people didn't do the jobs the way the industry outlined the protocols. And so I agree with Dean. It's a beautiful video.
A really well done video, really explains it well. And I'll offer one note, I would say. When I first trained to be an instructor, a firearms instructor back in the early 90s, one of the things that they taught us was that a firearm or a gun is not always used as a weapon. And I grew up in shooting sports, so I shot tens of thousands of rounds competitively and never had the inclination for my gun to be used as a weapon. Never wanted it to hurt anybody. So when we trained people in gun safety, we encouraged people to release that word and to call a gun what it is. It's a gun, a firearm, a rifle, a pistol, shotgun, a gat, a rod, a heater. Any of those things works because the word weapon has the connotation of someone is going to get hurt or may get hurt. And in my experience as a prop master, I have simulated every manner of weapon, from a time bomb to poison, firearms, knives, etc., to piano wire around the neck, and we never intend for anyone to actually get hurt. So I choose not to ever call them weapons. And when I teach the class that I do, I offer people a replacement word. There's a million other words other than the W word, because nobody's going to get hurt on my set here today.
Thing here is no live rounds, and this is for people that aren't in the business. No live rounds are ever allowed on a film set. They're just not. And then when people are, tend to really have their senses heightened when blanks are in a weapon, and everyone's super careful. And I can't say that a little bit of your guard goes down when you're handed a weapon that you're told has dummies in it, and that dummies, are much safer than blanks, and blanks can still, blow powder out, and, there's always the off chance that a little piece of the crimped section could come off. There's lots of worries that you have with blanks, but your guard's really down when it comes to dealing with the dummies, because we never have live rounds on set. That's the whole weird anomaly to this whole thing, is that's not something that ever happens. This was just such a crazy, strange thing.
We don't know, but somehow they got there, and they shouldn't have been there. We wish that we knew, but they can't figure that out.
It goes back ultimately to hiring, and the show clearly mishired. I mean, you hire somebody with one credit, and your prop master only had a credit as well. And the thing about people who don't have experiences, they can't control the energy of a set. I always talk about the adrenalized nature of a set when firearms are out. It becomes a different environment at times. And you have to have calm professionals, people with long resumes, to control that environment, especially if you get around an actor who can be a little bit hot-headed, or a first AD who, as we call in Canada, rammy, which means he's just in your ear all the time, hurry, hurry. And you have the ability with your experience to push back. But ultimately, it goes right back to what Mark said in the beginning. A live round ended up on that set. And I think for all of us who've been in the industry for decades, we can't process how that happened. And then to have every protocol that you guys just outlined amazingly in your video be completely missed. And the fact that there was a live round in the cartridge belt as well. It wasn't just Alec. And how many live rounds were in some of the other firearms that nobody ever knew because of what went down?
We have pictures of the cartridge belt and the box of ammo. Can we pull those up?
I think from
Okay, look at this.
authority.
This is from the evidence. So you see the silver primer, that the dot in the middle is the primer. The silver one, that's the live round. That was found in a box on the prop cart. Then the next photo
You know, one of these things is not
Is-
like the other.
is Alec Baldwin's gun belt. It seems like the prosecution is really going with the Alec Baldwin personality route. And during the pretrial, they ruled that, in the defense's favor, that any behind-the-scenes video not related to gun handling, is ruled not admissible, such as video of him being rude to the crew.
And if Alec Baldwin was on trial for being an asshole, he would be convicted. But he's not. He's on trial for, involuntary manslaughter. And he's on trial for being responsible for the death of someone, even though it was an obvious accident. And, to us in the business, we're in charge of safety. The armor's in charge of guns and safety. The actor is not. The actor is someone that's there to perform a role. When you hand them a gun and say cold gun, especially someone like Alec Baldwin who's been in the business for decades, he's done this 1,000 times literally, never would he think that anything would be wrong with the gun, let alone a live round, which is a 1 in a million thing. It's never really happened before.
Out, but they can show the videos where weapons, guns are involved. This is going to be hard, Dutch. I'm really trying.
Well, it is the option of every actor on the set to look at the guns that are going to be involved in a scene. They may be pointing the guns in their general direction. They may be using the guns and pointing them elsewhere. It is their option. It is never their obligation. So anytime an actor wants to see it, I will encourage that and say, great, I'm glad to show you the gun between every single take. We've loaded this many rounds. And to reiterate their choreography for the scene at that time, which is a great thing. Remember, you start here on this mark, and where are you pointing when you go from here to there? And where is your finger? Is it off the trigger from this point to that? And it's a good time to re-coach them. But it's not their obligation, because think about this. An actor is being another person. They're in another space and time. They're not standing on a film set with you. Their headspace is in 1836 or 2027. They're in that space, in that character. They're not now, let me check the temperature of the food. Let me adjust the brakes on the car. Let me see the gun. No, they're thinking about their dialogue, all the interaction they're about to have, finding their marks, finding their light. So many things that they're concerned about. They just need to have everything in the set set up for that scene. It's like theater. When an actor in a theater, during a scene, they're going to go over to this drawer and pull something out. And then a few beats later in the scene, they're going to go over to the refrigerator and pull something out. And a few beats later, they're going to grab the umbrella. Our job is to set the umbrella, set the things in the refrigerator, set things in the drawer, and walk away. It's safe. It's ready to go. Now go play fully. Now go be that character and go get the Oscar.
All right, Dutch, I'd like you to weigh in on one of the things talked about in the opening statements today was the weapon itself, which was I believe it's a Pieta version, am I correct on that, of the Colt 45?
Single Action Army reproduction by Pieta in Italy.
And according to the defense attorney, it was destroyed during the FBI investigative process.
Yeah, absolutely. What we initially saw from the FBI was that they were going to test the gun to make sure that it functioned as it was originally designed, as it was intended. And that makes sense, to test that, to make sure that it didn't have any malfunctions. And that was the initial set of tests that they did. It's pull the hammer back, pull the trigger, does it fire? And it worked fine. It worked flawlessly, they said, just as designed. Now, it has come out that they did a further test called a drop test on this revolver. Now, these old 1870s revolvers, the design was such that the hammer and therefore the firing pin sits on a cylinder. So when it's at rest, it literally sits against the cylinder. If that gun was to drop, let's say fall out of a cowboy's holster, that hammer would be struck by the ground potentially and fire the round that it was resting on. So they now do a test on these guns to make sure that it's not susceptible to that action. And this particular gun probably wouldn't be the way it was designed. It was designed a little bit different with a quarter cock, which pulls the hammer away just a quarter of the way. So if it drops, it shouldn't fall on the cylinder. So they did this test, and they used a mallet, a heavy leather mallet, and they banged the hammer until they got it to break. The point of that test is irrelevant to this case. I have a huge problem with that. This case has nothing to do with the gun being dropped and fired from the hammer being hit. Nobody claimed that ever happened. There's no reason to test it for that. So it's come out in testimony just the last 2 weeks from the FBI investigator, the guy in their science lab. He said that he tested the gun to make sure it functioned properly, and then he heard Alec Baldwin on the news talking about how he didn't pull the trigger. So this FBI investigator told his boss, maybe we should test it for a drop test. And his boss in the FBI and the prosecutors agreed to do a drop test, despite the fact that they knew it could damage the firearm. So they said, 2 thumbs up, let's do the drop test, which again is irrelevant to this case. So they struck the hammer with this mallet in 6 different directions, and when they did, they shattered 3 internal parts of the gun. So that gun can never be tested by the defense in its original state that it was on that day. There's no way we can know 100% for sure that it was functioning, at least for the defense to have their own test on it. So the prosecutor, in their brilliance, hired another expert to replace the broken parts in the gun. So I'm sorry, is that gun now the way it was on set on that day? No, it's got new parts in it. It cannot be tested in the exact initial state. So I think that the prosecutor has bungled this up. I think the FBI bungled this up, and I think the gun comes out of the equation.
I was an active cowboy action shooter for years as well. And we do a thing in cowboy action shooting called slip shooting, where if you you cock the hammer, pull the trigger, it fires the gun. The hammer does one thing. It turns the cylinder, indexes the next round under the hammer. If you want to shoot the gun really, really fast, it's like fanning. You hold the trigger after that first shot. You don't release it. Then when you thumb it back, all you got to do is let go of the hammer, and it goes forward, fires the gun. You just keep doing that, bam, bam, bam. So it's a possibility he was doing that multiple times, showing the gun to camera. He pulled the gun out, snapped it, and didn't release the trigger. Then he pulled the hammer back the next time, and he let go of the hammer, and the gun went off because he didn't let go of the trigger to engage the sear.
Was this firearm fresh out of the box, brand new? Like, how old was this firearm? What is the wear on it as well? There are many things that can happen with a Western firearm on a set if it's not been serviced properly and has been out on show after show. And
Yes.
And going to what John said, I've had many times where with actors they've used the trigger guard as their leverage for drawing, and they pull the hammer back and forget to take their finger off the trigger, and it just drops. So there are many things in play there.
Yeah.
One thing I want to ask real quick is, since the incident happened, how has it affected your jobs as armorers? Let's start with John.
I was actually working in New Mexico in Albuquerque the day on October 21st, 2021. And we were actually doing a scene in a bar and going outside in the parking lot, and we were going to do gun work that day. And it was the second season of an episodic police procedural, and we had done blank fire consistently before arrest happened. So obviously we had a big get together, and we talked about it before we went out and did the gun work that night. And we had a couple of, people didn't want it. It was a scary day. But immediately the show, the next morning I got called in the office, and we're not going to do blanks anymore, period. It's going to be, we're going to do airsofts. We're going to do, and we talked about it, and I demoed them a solid plug gun so that we could still get movement of the slide and ejection, and they can spend the money to put the muzzle flashes in post. And we went that route, but we still had the airsofts. But a lot of shows have, in my experience, people call me and they say, can we do this with airsofts or rubber guns and no real guns? And so it's like, well, of course we can, but you try and work with them and see what they what you can put in place to make to enhance the action of the show and give it some realism and do it. But I think the number of shows that have used real guns have cut down, which means they think they don't need an armor just because now they've got airsoft guns. But airsoft guns, as I remember from Dutch's class, they have their own dangers. They have their priorities and they have their own problems. And you don't get some of the realism bleeds away, and so that's that. But I think it's coming back around. It's interesting. There's a couple of shows here in Texas right now that Taylor Sheridan's doing, and I tell you right now, it's all blanks all day, every day.
Dean, in Canada, what's the atmosphere like since Rust happened?
Well, when Rust happened, I was helping on a feature for Netflix, and we immediately had a meeting, and they called our armorer Rob Fournier in and the prop master Michelle Hendrickson, and they sat down. And Rob is very much like Dutch or John, one of the top armorers in Canada, and he explained everything to Netflix, the executives, and they carried on with blanks on that film after. They didn't do as many, but they carried on. And then we had a real pushback here. The armory business and the rental houses took a real hit because a lot of the network shows said you can't even bring a firearm with a firing pin in it to a show and tell. So they were paying their service guys to deactivate every firearm that came to a show for a show and tell. It was a network policy. And so it was pretty devastating. But like John said, in the last year and a half or so, it's slowly climb back. And when I did the Jude Law film, The Order, last year in Calgary, the director looked at me and said, I don't want airsofts. It was a bank robbery heist. It was shot like a Sidney Lumet 1970s film, car mounts, machine guns and everything. And you know, I have to admit, as a prop master, I kind of gave in to the airsoft a little bit just because of where the industry was going. But you cannot replace the energy of an actor who, if the script says he has an AK-47 or he has an AR-15 or he has a MAC-10 or an Uzi, you can't replicate that with an airsoft.
Dutch in Los Angeles, how are things in that front since Rust?
The immediate reaction, when Rust happened, I had been a regular day player on 2 shows at the same time. That was my full year's of work. One was SEAL Team for CBS Paramount Plus, and that is a dragster-fueled, pumped-up action show with all kinds of lead flying, theoretical lead flying, machine gun fire and combat, and helicopters with big miniguns. And then the other show I was working on was Euphoria for HBO, and that show's about teenagers with drug problems. So they seldom would have guns, but when we had guns, I was the armorer for that show. And just prior to Rust, we had done the season 2 finale, which was a dozen SWAT guys busting into a house, firing M4s full automatic. And we choreographed what was a 3-day scene that turned into about a 3-week scene. Sam Levinson is a hell of a director, and they gave him free rein. And when it's seen, they wanted to change it and make it bigger and bigger, it just was massive. So I was there choreographing this for weeks. And then Rust happens, and I come back, and we're going to shoot a little more coverage, nothing really big. And now suddenly everyone on the crew wants to see every dummy round, every gun. And so I had 8 people raise their hands. We're going to do the scene. I want to see the gun. I want to see the gun. I want to see the gun. So I said, great. So we laid out 3 catering tables lengthwise. We had one scene with like 6 guns in it, 3 boxes of dummies. And so we're laying out all these guns and all these dummies, and I'm lining up with people, and we're rattling all the rounds, and we're looking at each of the guns, and it's taking, 15, 20 minutes. And production time, that is just a killer, not acceptable. Wow. So, and by the end of that process, I did it with an open heart and grace and dignity and said, okay, great, let's show you all the guns. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. However, they realized at the end of that process, oh, this was a waste of time. You're the same guy that just choreographed this major gun battle with no injuries, no mistakes. It looked great. That's right. Rust is not you. You're okay. And say they saw the futility of doing that.
We also wanted to show really quick a video we mentioned earlier that is Dutch talking specifically about the trigger on this gun in the Rust situation. So let's play that real quick.
So as I pull the hammer back, I want you to watch the trigger. The trigger will go slightly forward during this action. And then as I go to latch it all the way in the last space, it has to go forward in order to lock in. If you prevent it from going forward, and I can just pinch it sideways here and prevent it from traveling forward, the hammer will drop. I didn't have to put any pressure on the trigger. I don't have to pull the trigger per se. You just have to prevent it from going into its space. And so these Western shooters have told me that they've had that experience where you sort of bind the trigger accidentally with perhaps the meat of your finger, and it's just enough to keep it from going into its latch position. And if it falls forward, it goes all the way forward onto a cartridge into the final place.
We're talking about how the pendulum has swung back in the last year and a half, and more productions are open to conventional blank use. But let's start with Dutch on this one.
Two things. I want to reiterate what Mark just said about the fact that it's a 1 in a million shot. That is an inaccurate number, and I'll tell you what. My show SEAL team, I'm one of up to 8 armorers at a time on that show. We quantified that in 7 seasons, that one TV show burned almost 2 million rounds. That's one TV show out of the hundreds and hundreds of TV shows there are. So I've talked to a lot of the prop houses and armorers, and we quantify that the industry burns off tens of millions of blanks every year. So let that sink in. It's probably hundreds and hundreds of millions of blanks completely safely, not a real round. So it's not even a 1 in a million. It's probably 1 in a billion, really, that this thing happened.
I think the other thing that we're missing here, too, is that it's not just the armorer, but the first AD, who should never have been given a deal because he's directly responsible for a lot of things. But also, one of the things that the industry is addressing is vetting the armorers and making sure that you have the right people in the right job. Also, a young, inexperienced person being put in a position where it's very difficult for someone at that age and experience level to say no to power, to people who are the first AD was pushing because we're behind, we got to make money, we got to move, and the producers who are pushing to get things done because they're burning money. They're not going to pay you as an armorer for every day there's guns on set, which is ludicrous. The safety bulletins that we put out every day when there's a gun on set, whether it's a real gun, a rubber gun, a blank firing gun, or whether there's blank firing or not, safety bulletin number 1 goes on the call sheet every day. They never sent out one in the whole time that show was in production.
Don't really know how I can enhance that other than to say that property master and armorer are not entry-level jobs in film and television. And over the past 10 years, in this rush to content that was going on before the actors' strike, last year's PA became this year's property master. And I myself personally spent 10 years mentoring under some wonderful prop masters from Hollywood, Ray Mercer, Eddie Iona, and Unforgiven, just some wonderful legends. And what I learned from them was calm patience under duress. And let's remember that ultimately we are in entertainment, but at the end of the day, we are safety. And so the ramifications going forward, if Alec Baldwin is found guilty, for us, we've spent 2.5 years rebuilding our reputations and explaining to family members that this is not the way we do things. And if Alec Baldwin is guilty, then suddenly every actor is not going to want to touch a firearm. And it's going to become really difficult for us. And people have made their living for 30 years, 40 years, being responsible, top, world-class people in their crafts and skills, take great pride in it.
I keep describing it to people as like, if you're at a normal job, you work at a warehouse and there's a baler on the loading dock and it has a big sign, don't play with the baler, don't touch the baler unless you're trained. And then somebody gets their arm cut off in the baler because they were playing with it and they weren't trained on it. You don't suddenly change all of the protocols for the baler. It's the person who shouldn't have done it. It's the protocols are there for a reason.
Go ahead.
2 things. First of all, Mark, you raised something really important. The role of the first AD after, I don't know if it was Twilight Zone or Brandon Lee, at some point in the film industry, the producers said, we're going to assign a safety point person to the set. And the person that's always right there where the action's happening is the first AD, their supervisor. So let's make them the chief safety officer. Great idea. However, that first AD is also the person to say, hey, it's almost 4 o'clock. We got to get to the next set. We got to wrap. Taillights, got to go. So on one hand, they're wearing a hat that says, slow down, take it safe, do what you got to do. And the other hand, they're wearing a hat that says, hurry up, let's rush, rush, rush. That's an impossible position for that person to be in. I think that's a horrible thing for the industry to have that sort of pressure of go, 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 and make it safe at the same time.
We are reevaluating, the training and the safety on set, and going forward, the industry is doing it too. We're trying to come up with better options and better plans to make sure that these protocols are followed the way they're supposed to be followed. And I think one of the things that when I took Dutch's class, as a matter of fact, that we talked about in the class was the fact that the Directors Guild has put a safety person on set, and I know that if I'm not mistaken, Dutch, you said that the basic contract is also mandating that there be a safety person. So maybe we're moving away from that dual hat for the first AD and putting a safety person whose only job is to oversee the safety and making sure that the protocols are followed. And if that's the case, then at least something good will have come out of all this.